This girl is a witch, and tomorrow she will burn for it. Have the steak prepared in the marketplace.
Welcome to Watch Mojo, and today we're examining the most well-known state-sanctioned deaths that made an impact on history, whether they were justified or not.
The examiner checked her and her heart was still beating. So they had to do it again.
Gary Gilmore.
As a flotilla of police cars carried Gilmore back to jail, he bitterly commented to the sheriff he was shackled to, "Why don't they just get it over with?" On their part, prison officials vowed that they wouldn't let it happen again. If anyone was going to kill Gary Gilmore, it was going to be them.
When capital punishment was halted in the United States in 1972, many assumed it would never return. That decision was overturned a few years later in 1976 and solidified 6 months later with the execution of Gary Gilmore. He was found guilty for the murder of a motel manager and was subsequently sentenced to death. He supported the punishment and even decried efforts to put it on hold.
Since the verdict of the jury is death, do you have an election as to the mode of death?
I prefer to be shot.
On January 17, 1977, he became the first person in almost a decade to be executed in America. As the firing squad prepared, Gilmore simply told them to do it. Those last words made an immediate impact and even inspired future advertisements. His demise reignited the penalty, with hundreds being condemned to it in the following years.
National and international media converged at the Utah State Prison. Protesters held vigils. The ACLU made one last attempt to save his life, but it was denied 30 minutes before his execution.
Sacco and Vanzetti.
There were 7 years of intense national attention, international attention, and all sorts of demonstrations taking place in this country and abroad.
Condemning people to death has always been controversial, as evidenced by the trial and execution of Nicola Sacco and Bartolomeo Vanzetti. As Italian immigrants and anarchists, they became the prime suspects in a 1920 murder case and were sentenced to the electric chair in 1921. Despite shaky evidence and a confession from the true culprit, all appeals were denied.
The committee decides that Sacco and Vanzetti have been granted a fair trial, and people are devastated. And the execution is scheduled for August 10th, and then at the 11th hour, there's a temporary stay, and the new date is scheduled for August 23rd.
Tens of thousands protested, and court officials and jury members alike had their own lives threatened. Throughout it all, Sacco and Vanzetti were model prisoners, convincing even more of their innocence. Unfortunately, the backlash couldn't save them. In 1927, both were killed. Afterwards, violent riots were carried out across the globe, and over 200,000 traveled to Boston to mourn them.
To commemorate the date and to build opposition to the death penalty ever being allowed in the state, the Massachusetts Citizens Against the Death Penalty organization held a memorial service today at the Sinai Temple in Springfield.
John Wayne Gacy.
Over the past 14 years, I, John Wayne Gacy, have been appealing my conviction for the murder of 33 young men and boys.
Some state-approved executions are condemned, others are celebrated en masse. After being convicted of torturing and killing 33 teenagers and young men, John Wayne Gacy received just as many death sentences. During his time in prison and beforehand, he unsuccessfully attempted to appeal the decision. His efforts were met in vain, and eventually his date was set.
John Wayne Gacy, do you have any last words?
How about you'll kiss my ass?
When the day in 1994 finally arrived, over 1,000 people congregated outside of the prison to witness it. While there were a few staunch anti-capital punishment protesters, the vast majority were in support of his fate. Gacy was awful up until the very end, showing no remorse and even mocking officials. After 18 minutes and one botched attempt, the killer clown was no more.
I won't spend a day in jail.
Eddie Slovic. He may not have been the first American to flee during combat, but he was the first in decades to receive the ultimate punishment for it.
In all honesty, I don't think a single member of the court actually believed that Slovic would ever be shot. I know I didn't believe it. I had no reason to believe it.
Eddie Slovic was drafted for World War II, where he learned that he wasn't made for the front lines. After pleading to be reassigned, he was denied and forced to serve in a platoon. In response, he left and confessed to abandoning his post. After a swift trial, he was sentenced to death, despite others who'd committed the same crime receiving a dishonorable discharge and time in prison. In 1945, he met his fate by firing squad.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now at the hour of our death. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now at the hour of our death. Amen.
He remains the only soldier to have received this punishment since the Civil War, and his execution is still seen as controversial. Ernst Kaltenbrunner. Several Nazi officers were captured and executed following the end of World War II, but none was more prominent than Ernst Kaltenbrunner. As a high-ranking official with the SS, it was believed that he had direct knowledge of the workings of the concentration camps that resulted in the deaths of millions of Jewish captives.
Ernst Kaltenbrunner, guilty on counts 3 and 4. The tribunal sentences you to death by hanging.
At the Nuremberg trials, Kaltenbrunner was charged with conspiracy to commit war crimes and crimes against humanity and was then sentenced to death. He was executed by hanging on October 16, 1946. Maximilien Robespierre.
You're worse than Caesar! Worse than Caesar! You are all of you, the traitors! Arrest him!
He was one of the French Revolution's biggest heroes, and then one of its worst enemies. Maximilien Robespierre found himself at the head of the National Convention, which he then used to carry out a litany of public executions against those who opposed the cause. He soon became drunk with power and sought to arrest those he deemed against him. In order to protect themselves against his growing dictatorial attitude, the other committee members knew he had to die.
If you say I am guilty, you are all guilty!
Upon his arrest, Robespierre attempted to take his own life but failed, and instead critically injured his jaw. When he was finally taken to the guillotine, the bandages holding his jaw in place were reportedly removed, making his final moments even more excruciatingly painful.
Robespierre's last monument. He planned on having statues built of himself.
Charles I.
His final speech about going to an incorruptible crown is kind of perfect.
His legacy lies not in his time as a ruler, but rather as one of the first victims of regicide. Charles I of England became king in 1625. He was adamant that he had divine right, which he used to implement unfair taxes and impose his religious beliefs onto his populace.
I think rather than being a silly man, he was actually a man who was so absorbed in the story that he was telling himself that he didn't notice anything that was going on around him.
Things came to a head when he attempted to arrest members of Parliament, and he was tried for treason. Throughout it all, he asserted that he had gotten his power from God and therefore couldn't be held accountable. The people disagreed, and he was set to be beheaded. On the day of his death, a large crowd watched. When the execution commenced, some even commemorated it by using their handkerchiefs to collect his blood.
This is the head of a traitor!
No, it's not! It's a huge pumpkin with a pathetic moustache drawn on it!
Walter Raleigh. Walter Raleigh was certainly a man of many talents and stories.
She says hello.
And well she might, for I have brought her gifts and dominions beyond her wildest dreams.
Today, the writer and courtier is known primarily for popularizing tobacco in England, helping the English colonize North America, and sailing to South America and popularizing the myth of El Dorado. In 1603, he was imprisoned for allegedly conspiring against King James.
These rooms inside the Bloody Tower were adapted for him and his family in the 1600s. The lower floor was where he had his study, where he wrote his famous novel, The History of the World.
Upon his release, he traveled to South America again, and his men raided a Spanish outpost, an act that violated both a peace treaty and the terms of his prison release. He was subsequently arrested and executed in the Old Palace Yard to soothe relations with the Spanish.
So Walter Raleigh, he says, to cut one's head off is to remove all concern or depression. So cut swift, my friend, cut swift.
His execution was immediately condemned and remains controversial to this day. Zorawar and Fateh Singh. In 1705, a group of Mughals and hillmen attacked the city of Anandpur Sahib in northern India, where the 10th Sikh guru, Gobind Singh, and his family lived. After being granted an escape from the city, the Singh family, including Guru Gobind Singh's sons, Zorawar and Fateh, were betrayed by the family cook. They were then brought to Wazir Khan, a governor of the Mughal Empire. The boys, aged 6 and 9, were given the opportunity to go free if they converted to Islam. The boys refused the conversion and were bricked up within a wall and left to die. Today, the boys are respected religious figures and martyrs of Sikhism. Aileen Warnos.
Let me give it some thought and I'll decide where
I want to be back at the prison. I don't care what the sentence is. I'm already on death row. I'm going to see the chair. This is all re-electional purposes. This is not for nothing but get you guys re-elected.
From her killings to her own demise, she's remained one of the United States' most infamous serial killers. Before being apprehended in 1990, Aileen Wuornos killed 7 men, claiming that each was done in self-defense. After confessing to the crimes a year later, she was swiftly taken to court. In 1992, she was found guilty and given the ultimate penalty.
I sentence you to death for the murder of David Spears.
Thank you. And probably see, I'll be up in heaven while y'all are rotting in hell.
She spent a decade on death row, where she gave interviews and doubled down on her brutal slayings. When her execution date arrived in 2002, she claimed that she would be back before meeting her fate by lethal injection. Her demise led to conflicting debate about whether her mental illness or traumatic childhood may have contributed to her later acts.
Love will always find a way. Everything happens for a reason. Where there's life, there's hope.
Oliver Cromwell. He became what he sought to destroy and was punished heavily for it. Oliver Cromwell was one of the largest champions behind the execution of King Charles I.
The king is not England, and England is not the king.
Following the ruler's demise, Cromwell took his place as Lord Protector. His invasions of Scotland and Ireland and his dissolution of Parliament caused him to mirror the monarchy he claimed to despise. He died of natural causes in 1658. Some 2 years later, in 1661, the newly reformed Parliament got their revenge. They exhumed his body and hung it for hours, before chopping off his head and leaving it on a pike for all to see. It remained there until 1684, a brutal reminder of what going against the regime could lead to.
So tell me, Ollie, how would you like to be remembered?
Well, I suppose as someone who did what needed to be done, I'll admit I did some pretty horrible things along the way, but it was a small price to pay to make sure that the monarchy would never again rule this country.
Timothy McVey.
Are you prepared for death?
I am. I came to terms with my mortality in the Gulf War.
In 1995, the United States was shocked due to a horrific car bombing. 167 died in the bombing, and hundreds more were injured. At the helm was Timothy McVey, a former military member turned domestic terrorist who wanted to punish the government following the 1993 Waco siege. He was found guilty in 1997 and remained on death row for years while unsuccessfully attempting to file appeals. On June 11, 2001, he died by lethal injection.
It was hard for all of us to figure out how the Star Point High School grad who attended Good Shepherd Catholic Church in Pendleton could be able to do what he did after his service in the Army of the Persian Gulf War of 1991.
Family members of his victims claimed that even in his final moments alive, he maintained a steely expression that made it clear he had no regrets. It was the first sanctioned execution carried out by the government in over 30 years, the ultimate retaliation to McVey's vengeful crime.
Inside the death chamber at 7:06 a.m. local time, the warden announces, "We're ready." The curtains are pulled, revealing McVey strapped onto the gurney.
Giordano Bruno. Throughout history, scientists have had to defend their findings, usually against religious institutions. Giordano Bruno is no exception. He took an interest in cosmology and was a staunch believer that the Earth revolved around the sun rather than the other way around. He was also one of the first to propose that the universe isn't just limited to our solar system. These directly contradicted what the Catholic Church asserted and may have led to his demise.
Sa un sacco di giorni che non mangi, non bevi,
C'hai le labbra spaccate per l'arsura. Ma perché fai così?
He was imprisoned for years during his trial and was sentenced to death for heresy. In 1600, Bruno was burned at the stake, and his ideas were ridiculed for years after. Centuries later, he now serves as a martyr and champion of early critical thinking. Sir William Wallace.
Or fall to your knees now. Declare yourself the king's loyal subject and beg his mercy.
One of the most famous figures from the medieval period and a leading member of the Scottish rebellion against England, William Wallace has become one of the most recognizable names in history. Despite leading his people to several key victories during the Wars of Scottish Independence, he was betrayed and turned over to the English in 1305. Wallace was tried for treason and was sentenced to be executed. He was dragged naked through the streets, strangled by hanging, but not till death, after which he was emasculated, disemboweled, decapitated, and drawn and quartered.
He shouted out that he could never have committed treason, as he had never given his loyalty to anyone but the rightful King of Scotland.
Anne Boleyn.
Anne's head falls to the straw on the scaffold. Horrified eyewitnesses claim they can see her lips still moving in silent prayer.
One of the most famous womanizers in history, Henry VIII of England was married a total of 6 times. Of all his wives, however, perhaps none is more famous than Anne Boleyn. Considered a heroine of the English Reformation, she was married to Henry for 3 years.
I've got rid of a good woman in the Queen.
A dried-out husk who failed you, and whose Spanish blood shackles you to Rome.
For which I will be excommunicated.
She was unable to produce a son to serve as Henry's heir, however, and she was eventually charged with adultery, incest, and treason. Imprisoned in the Tower of London, she was eventually beheaded on May 19, 1536.
In an ordinary trial, it's highly likely that Anne would have been acquitted due to lack of evidence. But this wasn't really a trial at all.
Marie Antoinette. The French Revolution wasn't kind to the aristocratic class in France. While King Louis XVI was arrested and executed, the most famous casualty of the revolution has to be his wife, Marie Antoinette.
Ici, nous avons une image contemporaine du procès de Marie-Antoinette. Le vif, on reconnaît très bien Marie-Antoinette, on reconnaît son avocat ici, on reconnaît Fouquier-Tinville, qui est vraiment celui qui va lancer l'accusation.
She was faulted for the economic crisis in France at the time, thanks to her extravagant expenditures. She was eventually placed under house arrest with the rest of the royal family. Her fate was essentially sealed after the execution of Louis XVI, and she was charged with treason and executed by guillotine in 1793.
At that moment, which must be an incredible moment of panic, she still reflects perfect form. She climbed the stairs to the guillotine very lightly, without a pause.
Ted Bundy.
Ted offends the mind. He was as credible a young man as he could possibly be. Looked good, spoke well, intelligent, all these things. And yet, he was a pervert on the evidence.
One of the most infamous serial killers in American history, Ted Bundy admitted to being responsible for killing 30 women throughout the 1970s, although the actual number is likely much higher. He used his good looks and charming personality to lure young female victims before assaulting them. Bundy was ultimately captured in Florida and received 3 death sentences, and he died in the electric chair on January 24, 1989.
They want to kill me for their own satisfaction. Also, they can feel better, but they are not better than me. They are not better than me! Why, Bill? Why did this happen to me?
An estimated 2,000 people celebrated with songs, dancing, and fireworks in a field across the street from the prison immediately after the execution.
All he said is, "I'd like you to give my love to my family and friends." That was Ted Bundy's last statement.
Katherine Howard. Katherine Howard served as Henry VIII's 5th wife and briefly reigned as the Queen of England from 1540 to 1541.
For Catherine, being queen was everything she dreamt it would be.
Henry showered her with jewels. In the summer of 1540, he showed her off at a series of summer banquets and hunting expeditions.
However, Catherine allegedly made the mistake of conducting a love affair with a man named Thomas Culpeper. Several knew of their supposed indiscretions and began blackmailing her in exchange for their silence. Their adulterous affair came to light when a love letter from Catherine was found in Thomas's chamber.
This is a copy of the original letter found in Thomas Culpeper's rooms.
It says, Master Culpeper, I heartily recommend me unto you, praying you to send me word how that you do.
Parliament introduced a bill called the Royal Assent by Commission Act 1541 that made it treasonous for a queen to commit adultery, and Catherine was instantly found guilty. She, Culpeper, her previous supposed lover, Francis Derham, and her lady-in-waiting, Lady Rochford, were all executed for their transgressions. Sir Thomas More. Sir Thomas More held many titles, including personal advisor to Henry VIII and Lord High Chancellor of England.
He wanted his court to be almost a university of culture, and he wanted to gather round him men of learning and men of distinction, and Thomas More was one of them.
However, his later life was plagued with controversy. He was against Protestant Reformation, and he failed to recognize the annulment of Henry's marriage to Catherine of Aragon.
He said, okay, to the king, look, I can't agree with this. I can't go on with it. I will continue to serve you in, as he put it, other things.
He also never took the oath of supremacy, an oath in which one must recognize the king as head of the church. A jury found him guilty of treason within 15 minutes. He was beheaded on July 6, 1535, and his head was displayed over London Bridge for the next month.
I die His Majesty's good servant, but God's first.
Julius and Ethel Rosenberg.
There were multiple attempts to plead for pardoning or clemency or commutation of sentencing. All of this was rejected.
While spies and double agents make for exciting fiction, they pose a serious threat to the United States and its Western allies during the Cold War. Julius and Ethel Rosenberg were two alleged Soviet spies captured by the United States and charged with passing along information about the atomic bomb. Their trial began in 1951 and captured the attention of the nation.
Either one of them would have been crushed by the other's yielding. They loved each other, but in a very deep way.
The married couple was found guilty of espionage and executed by electric chair. While Morton Sobel, another American found guilty of spying during the trial, claimed that Julius acted as a courier for the Soviets, he didn't claim the same for Ethel.
When we learned that morning that they were going to be executed, the sense of disbelief was enormous. We were there, we spoke, we kept waiting and hoping to hear that the sentence had been commuted.
Benito Mussolini. Mussolini is one of the most horrifying men of modern times. He was the leader of Italy's National Fascist Party, who took over the country in the mid-1920s and ran a dictatorship for the subsequent 2 decades.
Throughout the late 1920s and early 30s, Mussolini's charisma and his promise to establish Italy as a world power led to his unprecedented popularity throughout the country.
He was eventually discharged by King Victor Emmanuel III, but Hitler quickly made him the head of a puppet state in northern Italy.
The Allies wanted Mussolini. But Hitler was determined to find him first. Despite their rivalry, the Führer did not want his old mentor to fall into the hands of the enemy.
Once the Axis defeat was imminent, Mussolini tried to escape to Switzerland, but was caught and executed, along with many members of the Italian Social Republic. His body was brought to Milan, where it faced violence and was strung upside down from a gas station.
I learned from the radio of Mussolini's death and execution. I heard it, and it was a moment of exhilaration.
Mata Hari. Mata Hari, real name Margarita Mloud, was a Dutch dancer who was accused of being a German spy during the First World War.
The courtesan has intimate relationships with powerful figures.
Sex and death together. I think that's what she is.
Her Russian lover was injured during the war, and the only way she could see him was if she seduced the German crown prince for military secrets for France.
She invented herself anew every time. That worked wonders with the press. It was much more serious later when she was in the spy network. If you tell police or customs officers that you're one thing and then another, then they will either think that you're mad or a spy, and then arrest you immediately.
However, the Germans had their own plans for her, and she was soon accused of being a German spy who caused the death of 50,000 people. There was no evidence that she was working for Germany, and she soon became a scapegoat for the French army's failures. On October 15, 1917, she was executed by firing squad.
On the day of the execution, she was brought out, stood in front of the firing squad, and she refused to be blindfolded. And she met her death head on.
The Romanov family. The Romanov family and various acquaintances were imprisoned following the Russian February Revolution, a revolution that saw the abdication of Tsar Nicholas II and the end of Imperial Russia.
The family was initially placed under house arrest at the Alexander Palace, south of St. Petersburg. But the new provisional government wanted the Romanovs out of the country.
One day, the group were taken to a small room and told to await transportation. However, an execution squad soon arrived, quickly read the order of death, and fired upon the family.
Once the family was in, the basement room was sealed, and Yakov Yurovsky, their chief executioner, informed them they would be executed. Nicholas could only respond with one word: "Что?"
But unfortunately, the chaotic firing led to some of the family members surviving the initial shots, so the squad had to use whatever means necessary to ensure they all eventually perished. Following some unmentionable acts, the bodies were then burned in a forest.
After the execution, the Romanov family was brought here to Galinayama and dumped in this old iron mine.
The family wasn't properly buried until 1998, 80 years after their execution in 1918. Louis XVI of France. Louis XVI's reign was certainly an interesting one. He had initially attempted to reform France by adhering to Enlightenment ideologies, despite opposition from the nobility.
Louis XVI really does begin his reign with modernizing and adventurous policies. So this is a modern, forward-looking king who would hope to reform France and to help France regain its status in the world, as well as the leading European power.
The country fell into financial trouble during his reign, and Louis became a nationwide symbol of tyranny. He was eventually arrested at the time of the insurrection, found guilty of treason, and beheaded by guillotine at the Place de la Révolution.
Robespierre announced to the tribunal that Louis ought to perish rather than 100,000 virtuous citizens. Louis must die that the country may live.
Accounts say that his speech was cut off by drums and that citizens dipped their handkerchiefs in his dripping blood.
The head was held up before a jeering crowd. Many pressed forward to dip rags into the royal blood, dispersing throughout Paris to show the trophies, shouting, "Vive la Révolution!"
He was buried in an unmarked grave before being moved to the Basilica of Saint Denis. Saddam Hussein.
The verdict was predictable. Saddam was found guilty and sentenced to death by hanging.
Known as the Butcher of Baghdad, Saddam Hussein served as the 5th president of Iraq for over 20 years. He was widely condemned in the Western world due to his brutality, which included killing political opponents and using chemical weapons against his own people. In 2003, a coalition led by the United States invaded Iraq to remove Saddam from power, and he was eventually captured and hanged. Video of the execution was leaked online and became the subject of global controversy.
He's already told them he refuses to have his face covered when he dies.
Guy Fawkes.
Who was in your gang? I'll never tell you. Oh, we'll see about that.
Remember the 5th of November. Considered the last man to enter Parliament with honest intentions, he was a member of a group of English Catholics who attempted to blow up Parliament with gunpowder in 1605. The main goal of the gunpowder plot was to kill King James and replace him with his 9-year-old daughter, Princess Elizabeth.
The plotters begin to act. In a vault beneath the House of Lords, they assemble 36 barrels of gunpowder, enough to create a devastating explosion.
The plot was uncovered, however, and Fawkes was captured. While his steadfast manner earned him the admiration of King James, he was tortured, sentenced to death by hanging, and quartered.
On the 6th of November, King James signed the warrant putting Guy Fawkes to the torture, and all the evidence suggests it was to the rack he was brought.
Mary, Queen of Scots. Mary ruled Scotland from 1542 to 1567. Her husband and half-cousin, Lord Darnley, was killed in 1567. and she married James Hepburn only 1 month after she was acquitted on charges related to Darnley's murder.
Burghley and the Scottish lords used Darnley's assassination to accuse Mary and Bothwell of adultery and murder, declaring them morally unfit to rule.
After losing the throne, Mary ran to her first cousin once removed, Queen Elizabeth. However, upon seeing her as a possible threat, Elizabeth had Mary imprisoned for nearly 20 years.
Months turn into years of confinement. Mary never tires of writing to Elizabeth, tens of thousands of words, demanding her freedom and pleading to meet.
Mary was later found guilty of planning Elizabeth's assassination and was executed in a horrible and embarrassing fashion. Numerous blows were required for the beheading, during which her wig was revealed. She was also refused her wish to be buried in France. Socrates. Socrates is undoubtedly one of the greatest and most influential minds to ever live. He is often regarded as one of the founders of Western philosophy, and he has made numerous contributions to the field, including the Socratic method. Near the end of his life, he constantly clashed with Athenian ideology and was eventually put on trial for impiety and corruption of the youth. After being found guilty, he was forced to drink poisonous hemlock, and, according to Plato, he was required to walk until his legs felt numb. He died when the poison reached his heart, although his contributions to philosophy have survived for millennia. Joan of Arc.
For a week, Joan was left to wait in her cell, alone with her English guards, her feet chained even when she slept.
The Maid of Orleans is a heroine of France who helped lead her people to victory in several battles against the English during the 100 Years' War. She was eventually betrayed, however, and handed over to the English by the Burgundians. She was tried on a number of charges, including cross-dressing, and despite a lack of evidence, was sentenced to death and burned at the stake at just 19 years old. She was declared a martyr 25 years after her death and is one of the 9 secondary patron saints of France.
If the church wants me to say that my visions are evil, then I do not believe in this church.
Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. You have the option to be notified for occasional videos or all of them. If you're on your phone, make sure you go into Settings and switch on your notifications. Jesus.
According to many, the terrible final journey of Jesus with the cross ended here at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the most sacred Christian monument in Jerusalem.
While some may debate the religious aspect, Jesus is widely considered to be a historical figure that did exist. A preacher in the 1st century CE, Jesus' teachings angered many of the religious leaders in Judea.
You think God belongs only to you? He doesn't. God's an immortal spirit who belongs to everybody, to the whole world. You think you're special?
He was eventually betrayed by Judas, one of his disciples, and handed over to the Romans, after which he was sentenced to death by Pontius Pilate and crucified in Jerusalem. Whether you believe that Jesus was the Son of God or not, his execution remains one of the most influential moments in history.
Here it is said, enclosed in the church, are the remains of the hill of Calvary, where the Gospels all concur Jesus was nailed to the cross.
Which execution do you think has made the largest historical impact? Let us know in the comments below.
All I'm saying is that change will happen with love, not with killing. Either way, it's dangerous. It's against Rome. It's against the way the world is.